They said she was just another passenger. Seat 2 to C was supposed to be quiet, forgettable, and far from the kind of place where anyone would make history. But on that day, it became the center of a story that would change how people looked at her forever. She boarded the plane alone, tired from long hours, dressed in plain clothes that gave no clue to who she really was. To the strangers around her, she looked ordinary, maybe even invisible. And that made what happened next all the more shocking. The whispers started when her carry-on bag didn't fit neatly in the overhead bin. A flight attendant sighed impatiently. A man nearby rolled his eyes, and before long, a few passengers smirked at her expense. Seat 2 to C became a place of quiet humiliation. She kept her head down, not wanting to draw attention, not ready to reveal her truth. But behind those steady eyes, there was so much more than anyone on that flight realized. What no one knew was that she carried a call sign, a name that wasn't spoken in everyday life, but one that carried weight in the skies. It was the kind of call sign that only a handful of people in the world recognized. One that could command respect instantly, one that tied her to missions most would never even hear about as the plane crossed into controlled airspace. A ripple of radio chatter lit up in the cockpit. The crew looked at each other in disbelief as a message came through, urgent, clear, and unexpected. Air Force One had adjusted its course. But why? And who were they diverting to meet? All eyes would soon turn to 2 to C, the very seat where she had been quietly humiliated only minutes earlier. No one on that flight was prepared for what was about to unfold, when her identity and her call sign would break the silence and rewrite the story of that day. The question was no longer about who she was. The real question was, why did Air Force One come for her? The passengers in the cabin didn't notice it at first. The plane hummed along as usual, flight attendants moving down the aisle with practiced ease. But in the cockpit, the pilots exchanged uneasy glances. The message they'd just received was impossible to ignore. A military escort wasn't standard procedure, certainly not from the one aircraft that symbolized the highest power in the world, Air Force One. Meanwhile, in seat 2 to C, she sat quietly, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on the small window beside her. She had learned long ago to live with silence, to let people underestimate her, to let them believe what they wanted. Her training had taught her patience. Still, the sting of those mocking looks lingered. If only they knew who she really was. If only they understood what her call sign meant. Her story didn't begin on this flight. It stretched back through years of discipline, sacrifice, and missions that were never spoken of in public. There were nights spent under foreign skies, days when her decisions carried lives on the edge. She wasn't a celebrity or a politician, but her name on a radio frequency could shift an entire operation. That was the weight of a call sign. Name born not of chance, but of trust, courage, and a record of service. Now, high above the earth, those coded letters had been spoken again. The cabin lights glowed soft and ordinary, but outside, something extraordinary was unfolding. Radar screens showed movement. Engines roared in formation. The airspace around them was no longer theirs alone, and yet the passengers still had no idea. They thought she was just another traveler in 2 to C. But soon, the truth would break through in a way no one could ignore. Something was coming, and it was coming for her. The captain's voice broke through the cabin speakers, calm but carrying a weight that passengers couldn't quite place. He mentioned a slight change in course, asking everyone to remain seated. Most people barely reacted, assuming it was weather or traffic in the skies. But she knew better. Her gaze flickered toward the aisle, then back to the window, where the clouds rolled endlessly. She could almost feel the shift in altitude. The subtle adjustments only a trained eye would notice. Her mind drifted back to the day she earned her call sign. It wasn't handed out lightly, not in her world. It came after months of relentless training, nights spent awake in briefing rooms, and missions where a single mistake could cost more than just her career. That call sign carried not only her identity in the air, but also the respect of those who had flown beside her. She had worn it with pride, even if it was a name she could never explain to the ordinary people she sat beside now. Around her, the small tensions of travel continued. Children fidgeting, a businessman impatiently tapping on his laptop, a couple debating over the in-flight meal. None of them had the faintest idea that the sky around them was no longer routine. Jets were moving into position, their paths invisible to the untrained eye but obvious to her. She recognized the signs, the subtle tremor of engines nearby, the faint change in pressure. The irony was not lost on her. Just an hour ago, she had been the target of quiet laughter, a woman dismissed as ordinary, overlooked in seat 2 to see. Now, the most powerful aircraft in the world had diverted course, not for the captain, not for the passengers, but because of her. And soon, everyone would have to face the question they weren't prepared to ask. Who was she, really? The cabin grew unusually quiet. Something in the air had shifted, though most passengers couldn't explain why. They felt it in the way the crew moved more briskly, in the way the captain's updates grew shorter, more clipped. Even the hum of the engines carried a sharper edge, as if the plane itself understood it was no longer just another flight. She kept her breathing steady, though her pulse quickened with each passing second. Years of training told her what was unfolding outside. She could picture the sleek silhouettes closing in, wings cutting through the clouds with practiced precision. Escort formations weren't meant to be subtle. They were a message. And when Air Force One changed its path, that message carried the weight of the highest authority in the skies. Passengers began to notice. A child near the window whispered to his mother about another plane outside. A man in a suit leaned across the aisle, pressing his forehead to the glass. Curious faces turned toward the windows now, searching for what didn't belong. Murmurs spread in low tones, building an uneasy buzz across the cabin. She stayed still, but her mind raced. Why now? Why here? There had to be a reason beyond recognition of her call sign. Escorts of this magnitude weren't routine, not even for someone like her. Did they know something she didn't? Was this about her past missions, or something yet to come? The tension thickened with each minute. The crew avoided eye contact. Passengers grew restless, and whispers turned into nervous speculation. She could feel the weight of eyes on her now, as if people sensed that the answer to this unfolding mystery wasn't outside the plane, but right there in seat 2 to see. And then, without warning, a shadow passed across her window closer, sharper, undeniable. The climax was no longer building. It was here. Something was about to break. Gasps rippled through the cabin as the shadow outside sharpened into form. A fighter jet glided alongside, close enough that its presence could no longer be ignored. Children pressed their faces to the glass. Adults exchanged nervous glances, and the quiet hum of the aircraft turned into a stage of unspoken fear. This wasn't turbulence. This wasn't weather. Something larger was unfolding, and every soul on board knew it. She felt the weight of the moment settle in her chest. One escort would have been unusual, but now another jet appeared on the opposite side, locking their plane into formation. The passengers whispered, "Theory Zan, emergency." Landing a security threat, maybe even a diplomatic incident. But she knew the truth cut deeper. These aircraft weren't here for the flight. They were here for her, and then came the twist. The intercom crackled, and the captain's voice carried a tension he could no longer hide. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone measured but strained, "we have been instructed to maintain course." Air Force One is now in our immediate airspace. The words struck like a spark in dry grass, igniting a wildfire of questions. Why would the president's aircraft divert for a commercial flight? Why now? All eyes turned, almost instinctively, toward the woman in 2 to see. She hadn't moved, but the shift in the cabin was undeniable. People were beginning to piece it together. They didn't know her name, but they sensed her connection. The irony was unbearable minutes ago. They'd laughed at her. Now, fear and curiosity drew them in like a magnet. She kept her face calm, but inside, doubt flickered. Air Force One's presence meant this was bigger than her call sign alone. Something had changed in the world outside, and she was at the center of it. The stakes had risen beyond her control. And the question that echoed through her mind, as the blue and white jet appeared above the clouds, was one she couldn't shake. Had they come to protect her, war to take her? The cabin seemed to hold its breath as she lowered herself back into seat 2 to see. The glow of her phone fading against her palm. Whatever the encrypted message meant, she kept it to herself. The passengers, still wide-eyed, whispered in hushed tones, trying to piece together a puzzle they'd never truly solve. Some offered her apologetic glances, others simply stared, but no one dared mock her now. The woman they had once dismissed had been revealed as someone extraordinary. The plane continued on its course, the escorts steady on either side, Air Force One a silent guardian in the skies above. For the rest of the journey, no more announcements were made. The whirl,